If you feel like your employer has failed to pay you the overtime or wages that you deserve, you should seek professional legal help for a free and confidential evaluation regarding the actions necessary to protect your rights and move forward with your claim. Employers are commonly violating labor laws that have very specific requirements as to the overtime and wages that an employer is required to pay to an employee. Here are some examples of the most common overtime scams that employers commit. First, take-home work. The employer allows an employee to take work home, but does not include these hours in their paycheck. For example, with new technological advances, the time employees spend checking and responding to emails without a clear policy from the employer to be compensated from that time can be a violation of labor laws for which employees are entitled to overtime pay. Next, tasks required just before clocking in or just after clocking out. Employers will commonly have certain tasks required before clocking in or after clocking out, and the employer does not pay for these tasks. Common examples of this violation are requirements to boot up a computer, to submit a detailed work log of tasks for the day, or for on-property uniform changes. Generally, employees should be compensated for this time. Next, pre-approval requirement. The employer refuses to pay overtime to an employee because the employee did not get specific approval to work that overtime. Generally, overtime must be paid if the employer knew or should have known that the employee was working extra hours. Training and meeting requirements. An employer refuses to pay for the time that an employee has to spend in required training sessions and other required work meetings. For example, oftentimes the food industry places certain training requirements before an employee can begin working at the restaurant or fast food chain. This time must be compensated according to employment laws. Also, excessive security clearances. If excessive security clearances are implemented that an employee is required to go through before clocking in or clocking out, then an employer may be required to compensate for the time it takes for each employee to go through these security clearances. Also, on-call work. An employer may be required to compensate for on-call time if the employee must report to work in a short amount of time and they cannot perform personal duties during this on-call time. These are just a few examples of the ways employers are cheating their employees out of the overtime and wage pay that employees deserve. Also, just because an employee is salaried does not necessarily mean they are exempt from the right to obtain overtime pay. For many salaried employees, employers are still required to pay overtime. Many employers take advantage of employees because employees feel powerless. Employees may be afraid to step forward due to their fear that they will be fired or retaliated against in some other way if they speak up. The law prohibits employers from retaliating or punishing employees due to employees bringing a claim for unpaid overtime or wages. Employers can be subject to both criminal punishment and civil monetary judgments for taking retaliatory actions against an employee. Judges take this very seriously. In addition, when an employer violates overtime and wage laws, generally the employer is required to pay the employee's attorney's fees. If you feel like your employer has failed to pay you the overtime or wages that you deserve, you should call us immediately for a free and confidential evaluation regarding the overtime or wage pay that you deserve.